Jeffrey, you can do the building.
Okay, so Shavua Tov, everybody. I want to dedicate this shiur to the memory of mine and Jeffrey's, and Marcel's not here, but it's his as well. Grandfather's Yortzeit, 81st Yortzeit. Both Jeffrey and I are named after him. By all accounts, he was a most remarkable person. I would have loved to have known him, but obviously didn't. His Yortzeit is on Tuesday. His name was Yaakov ben Asher Tzvi, although actually he was known as Yaakov ben Asher. We only found out that it was Asher Tzvi very recently when Marcel found a gravestone of somebody else, I think of his brother, who's Asher Tzvi. So his name was Yaakov ben Asher Tzvi, and this shiur is dedicated to his memory. Okay, we are starting a new chapter today and a new subject, so it's a good place to start. We are in Shmuel Aleph, and I'm going to get it up on the screen for you just now. For some reason, that was the only chapter I didn't get up, was the chapter that we're starting. That was a bit silly. Hang on, here we go. Chapter 15, if those of you are following in a Tanakh. Chapter 15, I just need to mute you all, 1 second. I have to stop sharing to mute you, hang on. There we go. Back on the share. Right, chapter 15 it is. Let's go from here. The end of the last chapter was the end of the war with the Philistines. You'll remember that at the end of the war, we had routed the Philistines under the leadership of Shaul of Saul. Jonathan, of course, had been the vanguard, had started the rout. Shaul had finished it off. And at the end of the chapter, we said that Shaul had gathered together anybody who seemed to be a decent soldier. He had conscripted into his army. So he had a pretty good army, Shaul. And now we come to chapter 15. Vayomer Shmuel el Shaul. And Shmuel said to Shaul, why am I reading? Go on, Leon.
Samuel said to Saul, Hashem sent me to anoint you as king over his people, over Israel. So now hear the sound of Hashem's words.
Just stop there for a second, Leon. That's a funny way of Shmuel to introduce this subject. It's almost like he's warning Shaul that you're only king because I anointed you and God sent me to anoint you. And I think it's consistent because we've said all along, haven't we, that Shmuel was not really very happy about the whole business of having a king in the first place. And it was very clear that Shmuel didn't want a king. And it also, I think, is clear that I don't think Shmuel was particularly enamored with the choice of Shaul. And so he's saying, Hashem has sent me to anoint you to be king over his people. And I would add in brackets, somewhat reluctantly. And I think that's the implication here. And he's giving Shaul a warning that what's coming now has got to be listened to very carefully because it emanates not from me, but it emanates from Hashem. So he says, listen carefully now to what Hashem has got to say. And then this is what he said. Off you go, Leon.
So said Hashem, master of legions, I have remembered what Amalek did to Israel, the ambush he emplaced against him on the way as he went up from Egypt. Now go and strike down Amalek.
Stop there, Leon. Stop there. I want to read the Hebrew because there's some familiar words in here. Not quite exact, but they'll be familiar. Some of them will be familiar. Kama Hashem Tzvakot. So says the Hashem, the God of hosts. Pakadati Eit Asher Asa Amalek li Yisrael. I have remembered that which God, that which Amalek did to Israel, Asher Samlo Baderech, which he placed him, laid wait for him, ambushed him on the way, Ba'alotom Mitzrayim, when he came out of Mitzrayim. Where do we read about this episode of Amalek attacking us when we came out of Mitzrayim? There are two places in the Torah where we read of this episode. Where are they?
Ki-teitzei.
Ki-teitzei is the second one, correct, Leslie? And the first one? Okay, I'll give you a clue. Ki-teitzei, of course, is when do we read that parsha apart from on Ki-teitzei, Leslie?
Is it just before Purim, I think?
That's correct. It's Parshat Zachor. And why is it called Parshat Zachor? Because we begin with the words Zachor et asher asa lecha Amalek. Remember that which Amalek did to you. Let me get it onto the screen for you. This is Devarim chapter 25. There it is on the screen. There we go. Verse 17, Leon, chapter 25.
Remember what Amalek did to you on the way when you were leaving Egypt, that he happened upon you on the way, and he struck those of you who were hindmost, all the weaklings at your rear, when you were faint and exhausted, and he did not fear God. It shall be that when Hashem your God gives you rest from all your enemies all around in the land that Hashem your God gives you as an inheritance to possess it, you shall wipe out the memory of Amalek from under the heaven. You shall not forget.
Okay, so there you have Parashat Ki-teitzei. That's the end of Parashat Ki-teitzei. You'll be very familiar with that. Zachor et asher asa lecha Amalek baderech b'tzeitechem miMitzrayim. We read it on Parashat Zachor. And you can see, if I take you back to our chapter, although it's not exactly, oh no, that's not our chapter. Where are we? There's our chapter. Although it's not exactly the same words, the words are very similar. Pakadati et asher asa Amalek baderech. And we go back to the Parashat Zachor. Zachor et asher asa lecha Amalek baderech. The very, very similar words. Now, in Parashat Zachor, we have the commandment here, and that's why we read it on Parashat Zachor. We read it before Purim. The reason it's connected to Purim, of course, is because Haman, the villain of the piece in Purim, is said to be Haman. What's his name? What is he called? Haman? Come on, Johnny, it's on the tip of your tongue. Yes, go on, Anita, unmute and tell us.
Agadi.
Again, Michael.
Oh, it was
Agadi.
Ben-Hagagi, wasn't
Not
it?
Hagadi, Ha'agagi.
Oh,
Ha'agagi, with two gimels. Ha'agagi. Yes, now who was Agag? Why is he called Haman Ha'agagi? Haman the Agagite. Who was Agag?
the king of something, wasn't
He was the king of something. Yes, Jeffrey, who was Agag? You're muted.
He was a descendant of Goliath.
He was a descendant. Oh, no, he was not a descendant of Goliath. Goliath was a Philistine. Agag, well,
King of Amalek.
He was a king who Shmuel killed. Who Shmuel he cut him open.
Okay, he was a king of Amalek. He was the king of Amalek, and we're going to read about him right now in our chapter.
Yeah. Nasty piece of work.
Yes, he was a nasty piece of work. We're going to read about him in this chapter now. He is the king of Amalek. So
he was
Haman,
very fat too.
Haman is called the Agagite because he is said to be a descendant of Agag. and Agag was the king of Amalek, which makes Haman an Amaleki, and that is why we read Parshat Zachor immediately before Purim, because we are commanded to wipe out the memory of Amalek. This is the commandment that's on the screen now. That's Parshat Zachor in Parshat Ki-Teitzei. It will be when the Lord grants your respite from all your enemies around you in the land, then you shall obliterate the remembrance of Amalek. Now, the question I've got is this. We are now about to read the chapter of the war against Amalek, where Shaul is tasked with carrying out this commandment. How long have the people been in the land of Israel when Shaul came to power? Approximately. How many years between the conquest of the land under Joshua to Shaul's kingship? Yes, Jeffrey.
About 400 years.
Correct. Exactly around that figure. Correct. 400 years. Joshua reigned for, I think, 80 years, if I'm not mistaken. Then we had about 350 years of the Shoftim. And then we have Shaul as the first king. So around about 400 years. Now, this commandment in Ki-Teitzei says, it will be when the Lord your God grants you respite from all your enemies around you in the land which the Lord your God gives you as an inheritance to possess, you shall obliterate the remembrance of Amalek. It's taken 400 years for the people to get round to doing this mitzvah. That's a bit slovenly in terms of getting a mitzvah done. And even then, if we go back to our chapter, look what happens in verse 1. They have to be told by God to do it. Come on, guys. 400 years have passed. You've got respite from your enemies. Now is the time you need to be getting on with doing this mitzvah of obliterating the memory of Amalek. So it's very clear, especially from verse 2, the language in verse 2, that is very, very clear that is taking us to Ki-Teitzei, and that this is the fulfillment of that mitzvah of obliterating Amalek. However, as I said to you earlier on, that is not the first time the war with Amalek is mentioned, because it's mentioned at the time that it occurred. Now, we know when it occurred because it says so. Baderech ba'aloto miMitzrayim. He laid wait for you when he came up out of Egypt. So if it's when we came out of Egypt, where will we find the account of the war with Amalek?
Haggadah.
We could do. It isn't there actually, but it could have been in the Haggadah because it's but that's, I'm talking about in the Torah. Where in the Torah do we read about the Exodus from Egypt? I've just given you a clue.
Bashalach is the
Bashalach. Correct. The Seder of Bashalach in the book of Exodus. That's why it's called Exodus, amazingly, because it talks about the Exodus. So there it is on the screen for you now, chapter 17 of Shemot, the Seder of Bashalach, and we also have a connection between this and Purim. Why have we got a connection between this and Purim? Because not quite as famously as the Parshat Zachor, this is the laning. This is the Kriyat Torah for Purim morning. This is the Kriyat Torah for Purim morning. And it starts on verse 8, Leon, please.
Amalek came and battled Israel in Rephidim. Moses said to Joshua, choose people for us and go do battle with Amalek. Tomorrow I will stand on top of the hill with the staff of God in my hand. Joshua did as Moses said to him, to do battle with Amalek. And Moses, Aaron, and Hur ascended to the top of the hill. It happened that when Moses raised his hand, Israel was stronger. And when he lowered his hand, Amalek was stronger. Moses' hands grew heavy. So they took a stone and put it under him, and he sat on it. And Aaron and Hur supported his hands, one on this side and one on that side. And he remained with his hands in faithful prayer until sunset. Joshua weakened Amalek and its people with the sword's blade. Hashem said to Moses, write this as a remembrance in the book and recite it in the ears of Joshua, that I shall surely erase the memory of Amalek from under the heavens.
Okay, so there we are. There's another, and in fact, the first reference to blotting out. Macho emeche. I will surely blot out the memory of Amalek, and that's why we read it on Purim. For the same reason we read Kiteitzei on Parshat Zachor, because Haman, the Agagite, was said to be a descendant of Agag and part of the Amalek people. And that's why, by the way, we make a big noise when we hear the name Haman, because we are, as it were, obliterating his name. And we are fulfilling the mitzvah by obliterating his name with noise. When we hear Haman read in the Megillat Esther, we make a big noise, and that is blotting out his name. So that's where the minhag comes from, of making a noise for Haman. It's not just going boo. We don't, you're like a pantomime. He's the baddie comes on and we all shout boo. It's actually a mitzvah in the Torah. Macho emchet zecher Amalek. And if we go back to the mitzvah that we have, it's the same word. Have a look at this. Right at the end of Parshat Zachor, you'll be familiar with this. Timche et zecher Amalek. Rub out the memory of Amalek. Obliterate it. It's a positive mitzvah from the Torah. And that is the origin of making a big noise when we say Haman. Doesn't
it make you remember him more? The more you mention to forget him, the more you mention him. Should just be obliterate and don't mention him at all.
This is the conundrum, isn't it?
Yeah.
How can you remember? How can you not forget to remember? How can you remember not to forget? It's one of those existential questions that you can't really answer. But the idea is that you should blot out the memory of what they stood for. And it's an important question that you've just asked there, Johnny, because in Parshat Beshalach, which we've just read out, which I've got in front of you now, we don't see anything about why Amalek is to be obliterated, just that they will need to be obliterated. When it comes to Parshat Zachor in Kiteitzei, we do have a reason why they are to be obliterated. And let's have a look at that reason now. Let's read it again, Leon, please, from verse 17 in Devarim chapter 25.
Remember what Amalek did to you on the way when you were leaving Egypt, that he happened upon you on the way, and he struck those of you who were hindmost, all the weaklings at your rear, when you were faint and exhausted, and he did not fear God.
Stop there. So what was it that they did that was upsetting God? Was that they attacked from behind, they attacked the weak, and they attacked the stragglers, and presumably the women and children, they were the weakest. This is an immoral war. It's not a war that was that they were trying to gain a land. These are people who have attacked you on your way out of Egypt. It's not that you're sitting in your land and somebody wants to occupy your land. I'm not saying that that's something which is allowable, but it's understandable that you think you've got a right to that land and you attack the people because you want their land. This was attacking the people because they could, because they were weak. This was an attack on a landless people who had nothing that they could give them other than the riches they brought out of Egypt. This was banditry. This was pure banditry. And look at the word here, asher korcha baderech. They meant they happened upon you on the way. It's from the same word as mikre, coincidence or happenstance. And they were opportunistic. Amalek, it's very interesting because you know from Tanakh where the Egyptians' land was, Egypt. Okay, we know that. We know where the Philistines' land were, don't we? We know it was on the west coast of Israel, Gaza, Ashkelon, Ashdod, Gat. We know that from Tanakh. What we don't know, actually, is where Amalek's land was. Do you know why? Because it doesn't matter where Amalek's land was, because Amalek, we have a mitzvah to blot out Amalek.
Because they were Bedouins. They didn't have land of their own.
Correct. They didn't have a land of their own. They were wandering around.
Yeah.
Now, the reason that we are committed to obliterate them is not because we want their land, but because what they stood for, which was immorality. I don't mean immorality in a sexual sense. I mean an immoral behavior, attacking the weak, attacking the stragglers, opportunistic attack. That is what upset Hashem. That is what got his goat and said, I'm going to obliterate them. It says so in Parshat Ki Teitzei. Remember what Amalek did to you on the way when you went out of Egypt. They cut off the stragglers at the rear when you were faint and weary. This was immorality. This was, even in war, there has to be a morality. Today there's a Geneva Convention, there's a war crimes and all that stuff. But even back then, there was a convention of war. This was an immoral war. And it was that idea that a people could come along and attack the weakest and the youngest and the most vulnerable, which is what singled them out. They're the only nation that you're told has to be blotted out forever. We're told that when we went into the land of Canaan, we had to get rid of the Canaanites and their idol worship and all that stuff. But there was a reason for that, because they were idol worshippers, and we were not to get involved in all their gods, which we did, and we never really did that job properly. But Amalek is the only nation for whom it remains a positive commandment for us to obliterate them. Well, we can't obliterate them physically because we don't know who they are. They're finished. There aren't any Amalekites now. So what have we said? What do people say? People say that anybody who behaves like an Amalekite, that's who we've got to get rid of. And so that's why, by the way, we said that the Nazis, Yimach Shemam, were Amalek, because they attacked the weak and the vulnerable. That's why in one of the previous elections of the last few elections, the Haredim described Yair Lapid as Amalek. Why? Because that's just about the worst insult you can possibly give to be somebody like Amalek. Not whether it was right or wrong to call him that, it's another question I don't need to go into. But that's why they did it, because it's just about the worst thing you can possibly say. And why? Because that's somebody who just is opportunistic. He wants to jump on the weakest and the most vulnerable. So it's taken 400 years to get to the point where the Am Yisrael have got enough respite from their enemies. And I think it fits that we're doing it now, because let's go to our chapter here. let's just go back to the end of the previous chapter. I'm just going to take you back a couple of psukim to the end of chapter 14, right, the end there. And if Leon, if you could read to us, please, the verse 47.
So, excuse me. Saul consolidated the kingdom over Israel. He waged war against all his enemies all around, with Moab, and with the children of Ammon, and with Edom, and with the kings of Zobah, and with the Philistines. Wherever he turned, he inspired terror.
Okay, so there you can see at the end of our previous chapter, the scenario is that Shaul is in the ascendancy. He has got terror of the people around him. And that fits very much with Parshat Zachor that says, there it is on the screen again, verse 19, Leon, of Devarim.
It shall be that when Hashem your God gives you rest from all your enemies all around, in the land that Hashem your God gives you as an inheritance to possess it, you shall wipe out the memory of Amalek from under the heaven. You shall not forget.
So there it is. That's the time when you've got to do it. And our chapter is now the time when that has come, because we've just said that Shmuel has whooped all the people around him. They're all frightened of him. He's now got that respite that was promised in chapter 25 of Devarim. And now, says Shmuel, right, now it's time to do the job that you need to do of getting rid of Amalek. And that is referring us to the chapter 25 of Devarim by the language in verse 2. So we can see from the language in verse 2 that this is the fulfillment of that mitzvah. Now, what was the mitzvah? Again, obliterate completely. Okay, that's what we have to remember. Now, let's go on.
The last chapter, though, Johnny, the next Apostle 48, it said he was successful, spoke and beat Amalek. In the last chapter.
Say that again, Leon. I didn't hear you. I've got some background noise.
Sorry. Johnny, in the last chapter, it says that he had already smote Amalek in Apostle 48.
Right, let's have a look at that.
The one after Leon just read out.
Yeah, okay, yeah. And he gathered an army and he smote Amalek and he saved Israel from the hand of its plunderer. Okay, well, the fact is that we have chapter 15, isn't it? So he didn't do the job, because if he'd have done the job, there wouldn't be any Amalek left. So in verse 48 of chapter 14, that was just a preliminary skirmish by the sound of it, because if he'd have done the job properly, he wouldn't have any Amalek left to fight in chapter 15. So it may well be, Johnny, and it may well be that which you pointed out is why we've got verse 1 of chapter 15. Shmuel says to Shaul, excuse me, you just did a battle with Amalek, but you didn't fulfill God's command. Now, God is commanding you to do it properly. Yeah, that fits in, doesn't it? Yeah, so I think that's good that you pointed that out, because it fits very nicely with verse 1. So now Shmuel is leaving nothing to the imagination. Shmuel is not taking any chances that Shaul might not understand what is required of him, because he goes on to verse 3, Leon.
Now go and strike down Amalek and destroy everything he has. Have no pity on him. Kill man and woman alike, infant and suckling alike, ox and sheep alike, camel and donkey alike.
Okay, let's stop there. Now that's very tough for us, isn't it? I mean, you know, we're not used to this kind of thing. Going in, having no pity on anyone, slaying man, woman, infant and child. And let's face it, what have we just said? Why is Amalek singled out for such harsh treatment? Because they did exactly what we've just said we're going to do to them. They went and attacked us when we were weak and tired. They attacked the vulnerable, and therefore they have caused the ire of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. So what are we to do? We're to do the same back to them. That doesn't sound right to me. Surely the people of God should be above that kind of behavior. Surely we should be saying, or surely we shouldn't be saying, well, you did this to us, so we're going to do it back to you. And we're going to go and kill the women and the children. Exactly the behavior which has resulted in them being singled out for obliteration. So I wonder whether what's going on here. Yes, Anita.
Why, if Hashem was so angry with Amalek, why didn't he destroy them with a plague or something, and all the lot would be killed?
That's a good question. That's a good question. Why don't you do your own dirty work, God? Why do you get anybody else to do it? Don't know. Good question. Perhaps it's to teach us a lesson that this is what happens to people who are vulnerable and weak and get attacked. Sooner or later they become strong, and then the aggressor will become weak. Maybe it's to teach us that circle of life, that nothing is forever. Amalek may have been the force ahead at the time, and we may have been weak, but there will come a day when we will be strong and have respite from our enemies, and then we will attack Amalek and completely obliterate them. Maybe that's the message there. I don't know. It's a good question. So
yeah, but God, hold it. But God said eliminate all of them, right, including the babies and everything else. But Amalek actually fathered a young baby, and therefore that shows maybe God was right, that you should actually have eliminated them all.
Yeah, you're jumping the gun there, Michael. You've just spoiled the story. But yeah, we're coming to that. But right at this moment, I've got a question. Can anybody help me out with why that's a reasonable thing to do? That God tells us to be utterly ruthless against specifically, and pointing out women and children and sucklings, when that appears to have been the crime of Amalek. Go on, Leslie.
Well, if you don't destroy each and every one of them, unfortunately, what will happen is they will live and start again and be aggressive. And well, unfortunately, you wouldn't have got rid of them. That's the problem.
Yeah, but the animals are okay. Are they going to be the same? Why why kill all the horses and the camels and the donkeys?
Okay, that I can understand, and I'll give you an answer to that in a second.
Sure,
I have less problem with that than I do with the women and the children. Yes, Leslie, you wanted to come back. Sorry, I interrupted you.
No, with regards to the animals, that's so they wouldn't have any wealth, so they wouldn't be able to survive if they did manage to survive. But sorry, I just thought, yeah, we want to obliterate them so they shouldn't ever come back again.
Okay, well, obviously, I think you're right, Leslie, because events, as Michael has just told us, as they transpire, we didn't do the job, or Shaul didn't do the job, and we ended up with Haman, because he was a descendant of Agag. Now, had they done the job properly, there wouldn't have been any Haman. You could argue we wouldn't have Purim then, and that would be a bit of a shame. But the answer, of course, is correct. In hindsight, it's right that I personally find it difficult. I understand that we are determined by hindsight, and again, those who don't learn from history are doomed to repeat it, are they not? So HaKadosh Baruch Hu is telling us here, yeah, I know it's tough, and you may think that this doesn't sound right because you're doing the same as they did, but there's a reason for it. And the reason for it is that there comes a point where a people and a philosophy, it's not necessarily the people, it's the philosophy, is so utterly wrong that it has to be got rid of. And it was the same with Canaan, because we were told to get rid of everybody in Canaan. Different because that was about idol worship as a different type of philosophy. This is about between man and man. This is this utterly repugnant behavior of opportunistic attacking of the weak. It's a philosophy that has to be got rid of completely. And many of the Mefarshim actually say that the mitzvah of Parshat Zachor, of getting rid of this, is to get rid of that philosophy in ourselves. In other words, everybody has within them a little bit of opportunism, a little bit of attacking the weak, of not being kind to people enough. And the Mefarshim say that this is in a way an allegorical commandment to us to look at ourselves, to find the Amalek in ourselves, and to utterly destroy it, and to get rid of that horrible character trait that's lurking somewhere inside us, which causes pain and suffering to the weak and vulnerable.
Exactly. I agree with you 100%. I have to tell you.
Johnny?
Yes, Dave.
Right. I've got no problem slaughtering the whole population of Amalek, but why not just capture all the animals? Why slaughter the animals?
Okay, so I'm coming to that right now. So Dave doesn't have a problem with killing people, but he has a problem killing animals. So the reason that it's not the first time, by the way, this is not the first time that we're told to get rid of all the possessions. Remember, right at the beginning of Sefer Yehoshua, when we crossed over the Jordan, our first battle was in Jericho. Jericho was completely destroyed. We were told we were not to touch the spoils at all. Same thing. We weren't allowed to have any of their animals or any of their wealth. And that's the reason that is because it's tainted. It's tainted money, Dave. It's got to be destroyed with it. And there was a story which I heard about a yeshiva in Manchester, right? A yeshiva in Manchester was situated on a road, and opposite the yeshiva was a house, a big house that was built by I'm not sure if he was a Sikh or if he was a Buddhist or whatever he was. He wasn't a Muslim. He was one of those religions which is sort of possibly Avodah Zarah, possibly idol worship. Let's say he was a Sikh. A very nice bloke. Anyway, they were very, very good neighbors. And this fellow, who's a very wealthy fellow, this Sikh, he made a big donation to the yeshiva, and the yeshiva had a fire actually, and the Sikh made a big donation to the yeshiva, and there was a whole big discussion around the town as to whether they could accept this money, because this money came from Avodah Zarah. Does anybody know, Johnny? Do you know? Do you remember that story, Johnny?
I think he had a temple in his house, didn't he?
He did have a temple in his house. That's right.
Yeah.
He did have a temple in his house. So this money came from, the guy with the temple in his house. Do you remember what? Go on, Dave. What are you saying?
Two things. A, did they accept it? And B, on that basis, would you get rid of Chelsea Football Club?
Okay, so I'll answer A first. Did they accept it? Johnny, do you remember what the end of the story was?
No.
Okay, so they did accept it because, nobody wants to turn away a nice big donation. And they bought toilet paper with it for the rest of the existence of the yeshiva. It was, and there was a lot of discussion about whether they should accept it or not. And anyway, they did accept it. And the way they got round it was they used it for toilet paper. Not the money itself, but they bought toilet paper with the money. Now, as opposed to going back to your second point of Chelsea Football Club, that is why we're told here to get rid of everything. It was tainted money. It was tainted money. Same as Jericho was full of idol worship at that time, had to be got rid of. Tainted money. Can't be doing it. The same sort of question arises, Dave. It's a very interesting philosophical question. Not quite with money, but what do you do with research that the Nazis did in their dreadful medical experimentation, which has the possibility of actually bringing benefit to future generations based on the work that they did in those terrible experimentations. And there's huge debate about that has gone on in the scientific community ever since the end of the war, ever since this research was found, those terrible experiments that Mengele did. Is it tainted information? Should it never be touched? Or do we say, no, at least some good would come out of it? And you know, that you can argue it on both sides. I think there are powerful arguments on both sides. And it's the same thing here. This stuff, this money, these sheep, these ox, and in fact, what we're going to find out, not today because we're not going to get to it, but what we're going to find out in the end of this story is that Shaul did not kill all the animals, and he had an excuse why not to, and we'll come to it probably next week. But the instruction was given to get rid of the animals because it was tainted goods. 1 second, Ivor, I just want to come back to Dave because you were about to say something and I interrupted you. Sorry, Dave.
No. Go. I'm listening. I've finished what I was going to say.
Okay. All right. And Leon's had his hand up for a bit. Leon?
Well, I wanted to go back to your question. Excuse me. Whether anyone could explain why you personally find it hard to accept the killing of the women and children. I, of course, have the advantage of having read ahead, and I would suggest that doing these things could be regarded as another weapon against Shaul to terminate his kingship and terminate his family from becoming the kings in the future. He's obviously done something which you find difficult, I find difficult, and I think a lot of people would find difficulty of killing the women and children.
Okay, you know, that's an interesting perspective. The problem, of course, with that is, as you say, we've read on and we know what happens in the story. And in fact, you know, this story ends up being Shaul's downfall. And so it's a bit difficult for us. But the reason it's his downfall is because he doesn't follow instructions. That, I suppose, in God's eyes, is just about the worst thing you can do. If God says do X, even if you don't think that X is the right thing to do, then you have to do it. And if you don't, well, then God's going to say, well, you're not the man for the job. And that's, in fact, as we'll see later on, what actually happens. I think the reason that I can only speak for myself, I think the reason that I find this difficult is because I'm finding it difficult to see that bigger picture. I'm finding it difficult to justify the mass slaughter of women and children for the reasons that Leslie said, which are the correct reasons. I'm not saying it's not right. And that is that if you don't get rid of a cancer completely, then there is a chance that that cancer will come back. And the philosophy of Amalek and the people of Amalek were a cancer which HaKadosh Baruch Hu told us to cut out. I personally find it a difficult concept to grasp that we are told to do the exact thing that Amalek were accused of doing to us. I've got Anita and I've got Barbara with their hands up. Anita first, please.
But Shaul seemed to have a problem listening to instructions anyway. Beforehand, when he was told to daven to Hashem and he did it by him. He did a sacrifice on his own, didn't he? Or he didn't daven, didn't do what he was told.
Yeah, that is definitely his problem, and that was his downfall. And we can see that very clearly. And in some ways, when we see that downfall in the end of this chapter, we can see it's a culmination. It's not just a one-off. You're absolutely right. It's a character trait of Shaul's that he doesn't follow the instruction of Shmuel, and he doesn't follow, therefore, the instruction of God. And as it were, I mean, these are Shmuel's exact words later on in the chapter: because you didn't listen to God, God has taken away the kingship from you. So you're absolutely right. This is not an isolated incident. Shaul has got form in this regard. Yeah, Barbara, where have you gone? There you are. I can see you now.
I just, as you were saying that, it struck me that aren't we then just as bad as Yamach Shemam, the Nazis? If they wanted to get rid of every Jew, and you're now saying that we should have got rid of every Amalekite, whatever they've done, aren't we just lowering ourselves down to their level?
Well, this was exactly my question, Barbara.
Exactly.
Correct.
That's what I'm with you.
Yeah, this is the difficulty that we have. The difference, I guess, is in the observation of who it is that you're trying to get rid of. We are told get rid of Amalek because of a philosophical deficit, and in fact, many of the Mefarshim talk about this being allegorical and being, one second, Philip, I'll come to you in a minute, of getting rid of that philosophy of anybody who is Amalek, anybody who acts in an immoral way like that. Now, you could argue that the Nazis wanted to get rid of us not because of our philosophy, but because of our genetics. We were a race that were seen to be subhuman, and therefore there is a difference. We're not saying that Amalek was subhuman. What we're saying is, I mean, I'm trying to answer my own question, and it's not very easy. But what we're saying, I guess, is that this is a rooting out of a philosophy, of a rotten philosophy, as opposed to rooting out of a rotten people just on the basis of genetics. And I suppose you would have to say that because these women and children are steeped in that philosophy, that they have to go as well, rather than as a result that they happen to have the same DNA and genetics. Because if you say that, then you're right, Barbara. We are no different in that regard. So it's a difficult question, that, and I think the only answer is what we've said, which is that this is a rooting out of a philosophy as opposed to a genetic thing. Now, who was there? Philip. Yes, Philip.
I understand Barbara's question. It's a good one, but you have to take this in the context of time. What I spoke about in Shul recently was that there's a difference between Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. And Judaism was the first monotheistic religion, and what Christianity and Islam did very much later, Israel did like 3,500 years ago, but they wouldn't do it today, I don't think.
The Geneva Convention.
Yeah, I spoke about that. Yeah,
the Geneva Convention is very different to the way warfare was even 200 years ago.
Yeah, exactly.
Let alone 3,000 years ago. So yeah, everything has to be taken into context as well, and that is how wars were waged in those days. That is definitely true. There is definitely,
Johnny, the context of time. This is
historical context is very important in that regard. Yes, that's very true. Okay, any other? Yes, Johnny.
So we're proving it in Gaza now. We could flatten the whole place if we wanted to.
We should bloody well do that.
We've got Rachamim on the people, women, and the animals.
Yeah, that's right. We're living in different times today, and that again, I think, you'll all be very familiar with my philosophy that things have to change with the time. Halakha is halakha, but application of halakha has to change. And whereas something that was acceptable many years ago is no longer acceptable. We spoke in one of the shiurim a couple of weeks ago about an eye for an eye, and the concept that was something which was an acceptable practice back in the day and it's no longer acceptable today.
Yeah, but it's acceptable by our enemies who are much younger than we are. Yeah, whose religions are much younger than we are. It is still accepted by our enemies. It's not accepted by us.
It's accepted by the extremists of our enemies.
Yeah.
In the same way, Philip, it's accepted by the extremists in our own religion.
I don't think that the extremists in our own religion are as extreme. They want to get rid of them, but they don't want to get rid of them physically.
It's all a matter of degree.
They want to move them. They want there to be another Nakba, to move them away, which might be a good thing, but they don't want to eradicate them physically.
I'm talking about the extremists in religious law, Philip.
Okay.
Our extremists on religious law would have the state of Israel be run according to the strictest interpretation of Torah law. They would stone anybody who broke Shabbos. They would stone gays, etc., etc. There is very little in philosophical terms between the extremist Muslims who want Sharia law and the extremist Jews who want the strictest interpretation of Torah law in today's society. It can't work. That's the same philosophy for them and as us, and it can't work. Yes, Ivan.
Look, there's a very fundamental difference, which I sadly learned through my cousin, Rebecca Whitler Frankenthal, whose son fell in battle in Ramallah, fighting three terrorists who had sought to give him a lift. She researched Islam and the mentality of the mothers. How come the mothers were so thrilled to offer up their sons as suicide bombers? Why do they celebrate the way they do? And what we're facing, in fact, is something totally different. It's not just an enemy. We've got a whole, and they're miskinim, they're unfortunate, but these generation of kids who grew up, especially in the refugee camps, they have only one reason for hating us, because they believe, first of all, we put them there, which we didn't. And they are brought up on their mother's breast milk, not just to hate us, but to see us as Amalek. And we don't get this. And it's very, very sad. And unfortunately, like you say, in modern times, we have to deal with things differently. Just a quick word about what you mentioned about the Buddhist. I have to say, my dad, when he first needed a carer, we had a Buddhist. And we found he had a little Buddha on the shelf. I was a bit worried about him. It spoke also to the Rav. And I spoke to him and he said, look, I don't worship Buddha. I worship God like you do. He had already sat with us Shabbat, you understood? We worship Buddha because Buddha said to us, God is too complicated for you to pray directly to him.
Interesting. That's the golden calf, isn't it? I mean, that's more or less, what we said. You know, more or less what the Jews said, or the Am Yisrael said with the golden calf.
We want something tangible. We want something we can touch.
That's right. And we know how badly that ended. So
but that's not Yoshki. That's not praying to Yoshki.
No, that's a very big difference. Very big difference. Okay, well, that was a very interesting discussion.
Johnny, just when I think it was Anita said, why didn't God do his own dirty work? When it came to Noah and the Mabul, he did do his own dirty work and killed the whole generation, the whole worldwide generation.
So Anita's question is made even stronger by that because there's precedent for him having done that, and I think it has to be for us to be the vehicle of that, to understand how serious this problem is of rooting out evil philosophy. Ad kadei kach, so much so that we can't even touch we can't even use their sheep and animals, and we can't even use them to buy toilet paper. Okay, we'll stop there because it's a good place to stop, and we'll see what happens in the story. Michael Krauss has already spoiled it for us a bit, but if you don't want to read the rest of the story, you want to hear the exciting new next episode, then don't read on. And anybody who wishes to be part of the debate, and I don't mind which side you want to take, of whether you would like to debate, this house believes that Israel should have started the rebuilding of the temple in June 1967, please contact me after the shiur. Any other questions or comments? Okay, Shavua Tov.
Bye, everybody. See you in 2 weeks.
Shavua
A little
tov.
after
Have a
that.
good
Johnny.
trip.
Shavua tov.
Shavua tov.